ultimately, Health Masters did not work out, but it gave me what I needed. And I remember talking to Phil about this. I was pretty despondent. And I said, we're never going to get these Western people to accept this on Chinese terms. We're going to have to come up with a way to talk about it in Western terms, or they're just not going to listen. And I think Phil's response was, well, good luck with that. I mean, who's going to pay you to do that? So I got to work on the second book, um, and I'll blow it up here in a second. The second book got the door open because I presented a plausible medical theory, and I went over and had face-to-face sit down as I created the manuscript for this book. I would sit down with the head of immunology, with the head of neurology, and so on, and ask them questions. What part of the body would be involved, if this happened, and so on, and then put together this theory that they were all kind of looking at that time and scratching their heads over and going like, this deep part of neuroautonomic physiology appears to be central to everything involved with health and sickness, but we don't really understand it. So I came out with the argument saying that, well, it's an organ system that can be regulated and it has a sensory capacity that this practice exposes. And I rebranded the word Qigong. The word Qi was sort of a no-go for Westerners. They just would turn them off right away. So I call it reflective exercise based on physics, the idea of reflection. Like when you shoot a radar beam at something, it reflects off the object and back to the receiver, and you get intel, you get information, you get data based on that. And so the idea was that your body is producing a signal that your hands initially can pick up in the surrounding air. And then from that, you can follow that signal back inside to its source. And when you do, it activates this sensory dimension of the autonomic nervous system. That's the essence of this theory. That got me into UVA, and I sold this to the swim team. I went to them and I said, I bet you guys get sick a lot. And they said, yes, we do. The coaches did. And they said, I tell you what, you teach the coaches. And if the coaches feel like there's something to this, we'll let you teach the team. I did. The coaches loved it. I taught it to the team. They went back and told the sports physician for the entire athletic department what was going on, that they could cure strep throat, colds, respiratory infections, even physical injuries at will. That startled that doctor, and he came. I was sort of dragged before a tribunal of the athletic department, and they were like, "What are you doing? You did this without our permission." And I basically said, "Mea culpa. I want to work with you. I'm sorry to have offended you." And they said, "Fine," and they let me go ahead. And then they assigned researchers to do a research project on the swimmers since I'd already gotten underway, and the project produced a really positive study. So what we found is that people that learned the reflective exercise routine that I'd come up with, if they just practiced at once they learned it, if they just practiced once or more a week, they were 75% less likely to develop respiratory infections, which was the bane of the swim team. That's what stopped them from performing well at their best level, was respiratory infection. So now I'm just going to blow the rest of these up here and then move on them one by one here. But the key was the publication of this book, then the swim study, and then I took it to Phil. And Phil immediately, I don't know who he took it to first, but I got an audience with the Assistant Secretary of Defense, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, his
I
staff.
took it to Andrew Marshall, so I took it to, and he made
Oh,
the introduction.
all right, so Mr. Marshall pressed and got us in to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. They were very positive, and they said, you need to do another study. And so then we then went to the War College, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I remember Phil and I getting up at the crack of dawn and driving through the snow and ice to get there. And when we presented, it was well received there too. But then afterwards, the head of research, this guy that looked more like he was a master sergeant than he did colonel, but he looked like a very military guy. He just said, "Well, you need to do more research on this." And then Phil, it very kind of, you know, Phil had just been sitting there the whole time. He goes like, "Well, we're hoping that's where you fit in." And then the guy looks at Phil and he goes, "Who are you, sir?" And the guy goes, and Phil goes, "I'm here at the direction of Andrew Marshall." And the room went dead silent. And the guy froze with his sort of 10,000 mile stare. And he goes, "Are you saying that Director Marshall is I forget that he used a military term, tasking us. That was the term, tasking us with doing this research." And you said, "No, I just think it's something you ought to consider." And he went, "Oh, yeah, well, we'll consider it." And then there was a lot of blah, blah, blah. And I sent emails and proposals around for a couple of years, and nothing ever came of it because that's just the nature of bureaucracy everywhere, as I found out as I moved deeper into this. Not just in the government and in the military, universities are the same way. You got to have a key inside player on your side, or you're going nowhere because the other pigs at the trough are just going to hog you out and block you from getting in. So the next step was I wrote up a proposal for a joint operation between the U.S. military and the Chinese military, where the Chinese would pick a Qigong system that they thought was effective, teach it to a cohort of their people, have a control group and an experimental group, and then um, see what difference there was over a course of time, the ones that practiced versus the one that didn't. And then I would teach two cohorts here, control experiment, control uncontrol, and see which one was better. And from that, we would develop a system or a practice that was uniform, that could be scaled and taught, um, not necessarily globally, but to as many people as possible. And this is an approach that I've called the supercell theory, which is that if you seed a human population with individuals at about a 1 to 6 ratio, and they have to occupy the same geographical space, that you would enhance just on the basis of energetics. You would enhance the wellness of that community by having that 1 out of 6 person operating at that extremely effective pulsatile level, and that would transmit automatically to others. And this is kind of what the Chinese were up to, I think, with the 30,000 Tai Chi Center. So again, I was, they took the idea and were able to be successful with it. Now, what I have here is that you can see this. So I had these things that I call 6 stressors, and I'm trying to recall what they were. It was environmental pollution, um, disease, and population are the three sort of negative things. And then you have cultural chaos. Um, I'm sort of gelling on the other two. Economic development was another one, and then there's 6 of them. And the idea was that you need to balance those 6 stressors, and the way to do that is with this what I called RE, reflective exercise, Western mind body acupuncture meridian Qigong. So that would be the system that would come out of this east-west relationship. You would then create a seawall, as it were, of human beings that would be, when they were hit by these stressors, which would include pathogenic disease, It would wash through them and it would evolve. It would force the infection to evolve. This is essentially what a vaccine is supposed to do. It would force it to evolve in a benign direction, and then that would redound to populations. It was kind of a wild and ambitious idea, but Phil got it in front of Rumsfeld, and Rumsfeld, I believe his comment was, "Oh, that's interesting," and then we never heard anything back from him.